Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. I woke up feeling uninspired, feeling unmotivated, feeling blah. And I was gonna allow myself to have the day to really dwell in my crappy feelings and thoughts. And at first I was okay with it, but then in my mind I kept going down this thought spiral of all the things that are contributing to my feeling like this. And then I started to just start to feel worse, and then I would have these meta thoughts and think about how I'm feeling worse, and then I think about why I'm feeling worse and feel like I hate that I can't change that, or it was just a terrible thought spiral. And yes, I think there are some days where it is perfectly natural and harmless to stay at home, indulge in all the things that are going to make you feel better temporarily, right? That's the key part here. It is temporarily going to allow you to have some relief, some semblance of calm or peace. But obviously we know it's not sustainable for long-term benefits. There really are no long-term benefits other than you develop a really excellent style at being avoidant, at addressing the root cause of things. And I'd imagine that those of you who clicked on this video might be feeling similarly, or are just simply interested about attachment styles, and maybe you feel that way because you're dating someone with a particular attachment style, or you're examining how you show up in your relationships with your particular attachment style. So I look forward to just getting into all of that today. What shifted for me was I was on my laptop and I was going to watch a movie. I was gonna stream something from my bed on my laptop, bundled up, whatever. And I just said, oh, let me open this other web browser or tab and pay this bill. Then that led to me doing something else productive for myself. I got up, I walked my dog, and then I said to myself while I was outside, sun beaming on me, although it's very cold and very windy in Massachusetts, but something just dawned on me that I feel good right now and I'm doing something positive. And so because I'm having this awareness and because I'm wanting to empower myself with having some agency, some choice in being able to pick and choose how I am going to be affected by life circumstances, I was like, we're doing this. It reminds me when the times where we allow ourselves to feel all the feelings, think all the things that are unproductive, but in that moment will give us some semblance of peace, versus the times where we miss those opportunities and the detrimental impact it could have on our mental health and just how we then show up later that day or in the future, what have you. Another productive thing I did for myself was listen to a podcast episode. I listened to a podcast episode about dating and attachment styles. I'm always just very intrigued and interested in relationship type podcasts, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a romantic relationship, right? We develop relationships in many different capacities. We have work, or professional relationships. We have casual relationships, whether that's the neighbor that you always say hi to but don't know their name but know their dog's name, or the male person that comes every day and gives your dog a treat, but then this never makes it past hey, how was your weekend? How was your holiday? Or hope you can go home and rest. And that's it, right? So those simple surface level pleasantry conversation. And when I was listening to this podcast episode, it really got me thinking about how I'm showing up in my relationships with my friends, my families, and also in the dating world as someone who is really trying to figure it out. I would even say that I'm not actively dating right now. I think this is a time for me to focus on bringing myself that peace and not allowing these external circumstances, people, things to dictate how I see the quality of my life. What I am also curious about is not just the basics of attachment styles, but also how would I define my attachment style, the way I relate to the world, to another object. And I consider myself a generally secure person, but I do have behaviors where I am being avoidant or I'm behaving anxiously. And so I started to think about attachment styles not being this stepwise process where you start here and end at a certain or a different attachment style. And that certainly could be the case, but I also see it as a pendulum that just swings back and forth. And it just depends on a lot of things. So today I'm gonna tap into attachment styles a little bit, and we are going to talk about attachment styles in dating sort of more broadly, and I hope to have another more in-depth conversation specifically about attachment styles or things that maybe we talked about today that really deserves its own episode. We'll be sure to circle back to that. At this point, almost everyone knows something about attachment styles, whether you've heard the term, whether you're familiar with the 4 different types of attachment styles, or maybe you just know the one that resonates with you the most. But just to get us all on the same page, I figured I'd sort of list out the attachment styles, the theory behind it, and then get into some of the real life examples or the things that others might be able to relate to better. So attachment theory was developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. And at its core, attachment theory explores how caregivers have a major influence on an individual or child's life and their development in the course of their life. When we're talking about caregivers, we're talking about parents, we're talking about guardians, we're talking about family members, whoever primarily raised that individual. So attachment theory more specifically focuses on how those early childhood relationships and how children relate to their caregiver, how those impact their adult relationships. And so there are 4 different types of attachment styles. There's secure attachment. So in relationships where the person feels secure in their attachment to themselves and how they relate to others, this is what most people would consider to be ideal. There is a healthy amount of individualism, even in like a dyad, even in the context of a relationship or a larger context in a group dynamic, they feel secure in themselves and who they are. They are able to balance their own freedom and acknowledging that like, I could still be close with you and you could still have your own life. And that doesn't mean that you don't want to be my friend anymore, you don't want to date me, I did something to piss you off. That individual doesn't assign negative meaning to specific behaviors and circumstances in a relationship. Then you have anxious attachment style. And this is where people with anxious attachment styles, don't mind Remy, she's having a ball in the background, literally having a ball. So people with an anxious attachment style tend to be overthinkers. They are really internally preoccupied with their own thoughts, their own feelings that are primarily fear-based, right? So this fear of abandonment, fear of disappointment, their actions or who they are as a person disappointing the other person ultimately means that they're gonna leave me. There's also this desire for excessive closeness, right? So if I fear abandonment, I am going to do everything in my power to make sure that I have you close, near, and in a place where I know that you will not leave me. But even if there is a sense of closeness and that is undeniable, you ultimately still fear the worst. Like, what if this person leaves or this person will leave and I need to do everything in my power to fix it? So it's sort of like nothing is ever enough. It's always this sort of recurring inner monologue. And then we have avoidant attachment. So here is where the person, as described, avoids closeness. So they prefer to be alone by themselves rather than being in this intimate, committed relationship that includes vulnerability. There's also this inherent mistrust or distrust in others. So they're skeptical about opening up to people, and whatever that person's inner monologue is telling them, they're then engaging in behaviors that avoids them being close to somebody. And last but not least, there's disorganized attachment, or known as anxious avoidant attachment style. Essentially what it is, it's a combination of attachment styles. And what that is a mix of both of those traits and behaviors that make up someone's relational experience or how they relate to others. And a lot of the time this could be due to unresolved trauma, unprocessed emotional experiences that come up in other ways in their relationships with others through behaviors or things they say or do. And that could really lead to these unpredictable relational patterns. So an example of how attachment styles show up in someone's life could look like, I had someone who was emotionally unavailable in that I didn't receive adequate love, care, attention, verbalization of caring words and affirming statements. Also could be this absentee parent or parents. So there is not a stable figure in that person's life where they can securely relate to and develop this secure attachment with others as well. Think about consistent and responsive care in a child's life and how that could lead to forming more secure attachments in someone's adult life. And think about the opposite. How can inconsistency as well as neglect then foster this avoidant or anxious attachment style? Now let's talk about how social media has really developed this particular image, negative image, about individuals with anxious attachment styles as well as avoidant attachment styles. So people who have an anxious avoidant style are often labeled as clingy, right? Stage 5 clingers and needy. But I mean, like, let's be real. Everyone craves a certain amount of attention. Wanting attention is a fundamental human value or necessity. And I think we sort of get into these really limited perspectives or arguments about anxious attachment style without even seeing the nuance within that attachment style. And so I think what we now have are people who are trying not to be that girl, right? Or that person. They're like, oh, I'm gonna play it cool because I don't want to come across desperate. And I say this with an asterisk. It is going to depend on what you define as desperate. It's also going to depend on how secure that individual might feel in that I am going to ask for what I need because I feel empowered to do so, and I know what I deserve, and I'm trying to date differently. And I also think there is gray area to this, right? Like, there are certain behaviors and things that people can do or say in a dating relationship that really could come across as unappealing, unattractive, and that could really stem from someone's insecurity, and that could be the stereotypical desperate or clingy behaviors, but we're not gonna get into that right now. But I think what you have are people who then begin to play these games and they avoid what they need in order to feel valued and supported in a relationship and to ultimately feel secure. I think people tend to play this game, not address things at its root. And then we have people who are still suffering even more in dating because they have unmet needs, unmet expectations, because they're trying to really embody this person that's not desperate. And then on the other hand, we have the avoidant personality style. And this is where social media tends to really villainize individuals with this attachment style. And I think what we need to do is separate being a true asshole, right? Like, I think most people can agree on when someone is being disrespectful, when someone is being inconsiderate, and so forth. And then we could also hopefully acknowledge when someone recognizes they have their own awareness to say, I am not in a space right now to get into this committed relationship in a way that is healthy, in a way that you deserve, in a way that I deserve, without addressing all these underlying issues first. And I'm feeling really passionate about this because I think I have fallen in this camp of like, oh, he's emotionally unavailable. And it's like, yes, and there's nuance. Yes, he's emotionally unavailable, and he recognizes that, and he wants to work on things so that he could feel more secure in his relationships. And we have people who sort of describe them as being non-committal, want all the benefits of being in a relationship without the label. And while there are some people who inappropriately utilize like that label as being non-committal, I also think it's a different story when someone does clearly communicate, I cannot commit right now, and the other person still chooses to receive that as that person is emotionally unavailable, they're not mature. What we fail to do when we do that is that we fail to recognize that people need space, whether they're articulating and communicating that they need space or whether their behaviors are saying that they need space. And I think we then misinterpret that or choose to believe a narrative that suits our own motivations, our own drives, and then ultimately end up in a situation where you're hurt. And so I think this video is just the start of acknowledging these attachment styles, acknowledging these misconceptions, acknowledging the stigma associated with avoidant personality styles. I keep saying personality. It really gave me a level of compassion and empathy for particular attachment styles, more specifically in the context of dating the avoidant attachment style. I just wanted to start this conversation and continue it because I'm recognizing this video is pretty long, and I hope that pick up on this conversation with more specific examples. How do we change our response in a way that is productive for us and our partner when we begin to behave anxiously or when we are acting insecure or feeling insecure? I think what we can do, right? We're not getting rid of these attachment styles per se because they have been a part of our formative years. They have really impacted our childhood, and we can't change that. That's history, right? But what we can do is recognize the root of this issue, how it's impacting the relationships that we do want. What can I hold myself accountable for in contributing to a dysfunctional, quote unquote, messy relationship? How do I show up in the way I want to show up in my relationships, holding both that fear and courage? And I think you could still have the relationship that you want, even as you're actively working through your anxious attachment style or your avoidant tendencies. I think it's realistic that the work that you do internally, whether it's with your therapist, when you get in a relationship, what do you then do? You then practice those new skills that you've learned. You work through all the trials and tribulations of a relationship that do trigger your fear response, do trigger your fear of abandonment. I would love to continue this conversation. I think this just sparked a newfound area of interest for me, and I hope that you will join me on this journey of learning about attachment styles. And I think the best would be to have these real life scenarios and talk about the things we do, the things we tell ourselves. And I think this will illustrate the point of you can be secure, and when all the cards line up, or whatever the saying is, this is how I'm showing up, and this is how it's triggering this deep-rooted fear or insecurity of mine. So I love you all as always. Please make sure you give this video a like, subscribe if you aren't, leave a comment. I'd love to interact with you all. Follow me on Instagram, Threads of Tenderness, and I'll see you in the next one.